Hello, my name is Roger Buck, and today we're going to keep talking about counter-revolution. We're going to keep talking about the regeneration of the Catholic Church, the hope I have for regeneration, that is to say, the hope I have for a new spirit, for a new fire within the Church. Now, in the last video, I spoke about how so much of Catholicism is like just going with the flow. Modern Catholicism is like a fish just going downstream, or it's like even a dead fish floating downstream. And it seems with the enormous global problems that we have today, there is a crying need for the Church to recover the fire that she had in the past, to be able to resist many of the global trends today and to forge a new civilization. And really, this is what the Catholic Church has been doing for the last couple of thousand years. I mean, if we go back to the time of the Roman Empire, we can look at that empire. First centuries, we can see an empire that was very decadent, really quite shocking to what we know today. A huge portion of that empire, well over 50% of the population, were slaves. They had brutal gladiatorial games, sadistic entertainment, and back then, Christians didn't just go with the flow of the culture of the Roman Empire. No, they resisted it. They pointed to something more noble, more alive, more living, more Christian. And within 300 years, 400 years, they began to Christianize the Roman Empire. That's what we need today. That's what I mean by counter-revolution. That's what I mean by a new fire in the Church. But before I come to the whole issue of counter-revolution, I guess we need to talk about revolution first, because the history of the Catholic Church isn't a continuous one. The Church goes forward and she sinks back. There are triumphs and there are defeats. So yes, the Church succeeded in converting the Roman Empire to a much nobler and higher ideal, the ideal of Christianity. Similarly, with the barbarian invasions of the Dark Ages, the Church elevated those cultures. But along the way, the Church also, as I said last time, loses her fire. Her fire begins to dissipate. We see this at the time of the Protestant Revolution, which began 500 years ago in 1517 with Martin Luther. And as I said last time, at the beginning of the Protestant Revolution, the Church had really become corrupt, had lost a lot of her fire, a lot of her spirit. People were in denial. But, as I also said last time, the Church then rebounded. Right across southern Europe, the Church rebounded in countries like France, Italy, Spain. Not so in northern Europe, it's true. But there was a mighty revival of the Catholic Church, which obviously went all across Latin America. Huge missionary efforts, that went into Africa, into India, into Asia. All these things happen as a result of the sort of rebirth of fire in the Catholic Church at the time of what we call the Counter Reformation. And, today there's something like 1.3 billion Catholics on this planet. They're the majority of Christians in this world, although we can sometimes forget that in the Anglosphere. But the Catholic Church is, by far the dominant church on this planet. And all of that is due comes down to this rebirth of Catholic fire that happened in the 16th century and kept on going. But yeah, I'm with the whole idea of revolution here. How revolutions come along and do have a tendency to destroy what the Church has built up. So this is a big topic. But, speaking in very broad strokes, we could talk about things like the French Revolution of 1789, the Communist Revolution in Russia of 1917, even the sexual revolution of the 1960s. Now, those things might seem to be all very different things. The French Revolution, Russia, the sexual revolution, and indeed they are all different things. But actually, if you look at those revolutionary phases, you see that they have common themes, overarching themes. The most obvious one of these common themes is a quest for liberty, a quest for liberation, which results in liberalism. And yet, I would argue that so very often these revolutions lead to anything but true liberty. Now, it's not all black and white. I'm speaking in broad strokes. I'm not saying that nothing these revolutions ever produced had some value. But look at the French Revolution. It was all a quest for liberty, and yet it generated unbelievable bloodshed. It generated what many people see as a major new stage in genocide, in that there was a calculated effort to sort of wipe out Catholics, particularly in the Vendée region, where hundreds of thousands of Catholic peasants who resisted the revolution. We forget that actually there was enormous resistance to the French Revolution, and not by the nobility, by the peasants. And they were just wiped out by the French Revolution. But it's not just those initial bloody, terrible years of the French Revolution. The tyranny of the French Republic would go on for a couple of hundred years. I talk about this in my books. They're back there behind me. And really, I would argue that for those of us who feel oppressed by the secular liberalism of today, so much of that goes back to the French Revolution, that the so-called ideals there of freedom that were born actually end up repressing people, crushing people, sometimes very bloodily, sometimes much more subtly. And I'm going to talk about that. I talk about it in my books, but I'm going to talk about it as these videos progress. But we could take also the communist revolution. Obviously, what there was a quest for freedom from capitalist oppression. And that's very understandable. But did it lead to freedom? Well, it's a rhetorical question, really. And even something like, as I say, the sexual liberation of the 1960s, the cultural revolution of the 1960s, we are told that this has led to enormous freedom. But is it real freedom? Perhaps in some ways it is. But what we're never told about is the other side. So, for example, the sexual revolution of the 1960s gave birth to pornography on a massive scale. And this pornography is enslaving women. And by enslaving women, I don't just mean obvious things like, vastly increased amounts of prostitution, or things like phone sex, or some of the very sort of obvious kinds of ways that women are now enslaved in ways that they were not before. I mean that even, we now have a whole kind of culture of the female body paraded across all kinds of media, not simply hardcore pornography, but softcore pornography and even Hollywood films. And I would say that women today are shamed by this new pornographic culture that the 60s gave birth to, and it's reflected. There's all kinds of ways that we see pathological results of that revolution. We see sex crimes, we see all kinds of things. But friends, I'm just going to pause there to say something personal, but it's also something that's relevant to my theme here. In talking as I just did about women being enslaved by the sexual revolution of the 60s, I felt just a little bit nervous. And why did I feel nervous? Because what I know is going to come back to me is you have no right to talk about that because you're not a woman. I know that that can come back very, very strongly. Let's look at that a moment. There's two problems there. First of all, this is supposedly a liberal society of ever greater freedom, growing and growing freedom. That's what we're told. But nonetheless, actually, if you begin to look at it, this liberal society, it seems to many of us, with its political correctness and so on and so forth, is actually narrowing down more and more and more of what you can say that's acceptable. And earlier I mentioned the French Revolution as leading to certain forms of tyranny. I would actually say, we can't go into it now, but you can actually see that some of what we're talking about with the tyranny of political correctness does have roots as far back as the French Revolution. That's a topic for another time. But, here we are in this liberal society with more and more that you cannot say or even think. What I just said is actually relatively uncontentious to what I'm about to say now. To actually say that pornography is a bad thing, that's not too radical. To say that the sexual revolution of the 60s has enslaved women, that's getting a little bit more contentious. But what if I say something like, I don't support gay marriage? What will come back to me is that you cannot say that. You are a homophobe, you are a bigot. Now, and then I will actually feel that I need to sort of defend myself. It comes out of my nervousness. But I'm going to say, I'm not a homophobe. I've known many, many, many gay people in my life, including some of my dearest friends over the course of my life have been gay. I empathize with those people, but I don't believe that the way to, and I know that gay people have suffered terribly over the centuries. I know this. I don't happen to believe that the way to address that suffering is through gay marriage, and I certainly don't happen to believe that raising children within gay marriage is a good idea. And I have quite complex things that I could say about why I believe that. Things that are thought out. But in our current society, and this is my point now, I would find it very difficult to even get the words out of my mouth without this crushing force coming down telling me I'm a bigot. But before going on about that, let me just back up, because I said there are actually two problems with this attitude here that I don't have a right to say these things. One is that supposedly we live in a liberal society of unprecedented freedom. That's one problem. But the other problem is this. If someone says, I don't have a right to speak about these things because I'm not a woman, who's establishing such beliefs, such doctrines, even dogmas? The more you look, I believe, at our secular and liberal society, you will find very clear doctrines and even dogmas that one is seriously obliged to adhere to. That's another whole topic. Again, I go into it in my books. In fact, in my first book, The Gentle Traditionalist, I actually say that our current age, our current secular liberal age, is animated by something that I call the new secular religion. And it's a hidden religion. It's an invisible religion. It's a de facto religion. It pretends not to be a religion. But when you look at it, basically there's an animating philosophy within secularism, so much of it, again, going back to the French Revolution, that really does act like a religion. with its own moral codes, its own doctrines, yes, even its own dogmas. Moreover, there is the expectation that you adhere to it, and if you don't adhere to it, you're treated like a heretic. That's another very big topic that I need to address and will keep addressing as these videos go on and that I go into in my books. The new secular religion. But what I really need to come to now is counter-revolution. Because, yeah, I've just been speaking in very, very broad strokes what I mean by revolution. But we need to come to what I mean by counter-revolution. Because basically, for most of the last 500 years, the Catholic Church hasn't just been going along, floating down the stream, going like a dead fish. For most of the last 500 years, the Catholic Church has really deeply believed in counter-revolution, in countering the forces of the ongoing liberal revolution. This is what really defined Catholicism right up through the 1950s, in fact. This ability to say no to the world. Anyway, this is what I've been trying to get at in the last videos, the last two videos. In so many ways, over the last 50, 60 years, the Church has lost that spirit of counter-revolution. Now, not completely. For example, I know and celebrate the massive pro-life movement against the Holocaust of abortion. But nonetheless, there has been a considerable dissipation. As I also said in the last video, though, I do believe that this fiery spirit, there are signs that it is beginning to be reborn. And I'm going to be talking about that more, in the videos to come. But yeah, this is really what I mean by counter-revolution. And maybe I need to make one thing very clear then. Counter-revolution is not about countering the revolution with violence. No. In fact, the great Joseph de Maistre, at the time of the French Revolution, said something very, very, very beautiful about counter-revolution. Basically, he said that we can't think of a counter-revolution in terms of violence. Just because the French are now killing priests and burning down churches and, conducting genocide, if we try to respond to this with violence, that's simply another revolution. That's simply a contrary revolution. No, a counter-revolution is something completely different from revolution. It's completely different from violence. At least that's its highest goal and aspiration. I'm not saying that there have not been times that counter-revolution did fall into violence. But the highest meaning of counter-revolution is to resist. To resist violence with being peaceful. To resist it with prayer. A real counter-revolution is about prayer. It's about charity. It's about kindness. It's about Christian virtues. But amidst those Christian virtues is the need to have courage and the need to say no to what is happening in the world. So yes, it's the need to have the fire to say no to the Holocaust of abortion. It's the need to have the fire to say no to the brutal excesses of capitalism in our age. And by those brutal excesses, I don't just mean the way that so many people are reduced to wage slaves. I don't just mean the sort of sweatshops in the so-called developing world where people are working in in terribly inhuman conditions because of our gigantic capitalistic system. I mean that and many things more. But it's about the courage to say no to pornography. And one more time, by pornography, I'm not just talking about hardcore pornography. I'm talking about our entire new pornographic culture born since the 60s. Indeed, all of this is intricately bound up with capitalism. You know, it's a maxim of our modern age: sex sells. Our modern age relies on marketing the female body above all to entice people, to entice men. We really, I think, need to focus on those kinds of aspects of capitalism as well. The way that capitalism is destroying Christian and Catholic values in pursuit of profit. Again, as I said in my last video, capitalism is not the same as free enterprise. I am not criticizing free enterprise. I actually maintain that capitalism is the opposite of free enterprise in so many of the ways that it works out. And that's a subject for another video. But yes, it's about saying no to the way that capitalism is actually destroying Christian and Catholic culture. And the spirit of counter-revolution, the need for courage, the need for fire, is also, again, about saying no to gay marriage. It's about saying no to the idea that a child does not need a mother and a father, and that it's just as fine to bring up a child with two fathers instead of a mother and a father. It's about courage to say these things, and courage isn't easy. In fact, I'm very conscious that I'm sitting here hidden away behind a computer monitor saying these things. And yes, I am a little bit nervous about saying them, but I'm nowhere near as nervous as I would be, and I can get quite nervous, if I'm honest, if I were out saying them in public. So how do we find the courage and the fire for counter-revolution? Well, we're Catholics. And what Catholicism is about is the sacraments. Above all, the sacrament of the Eucharist. You know, personally, I go to Mass every day, or at least I very much try to go to Mass every day, because I find the experience of going to Mass daily gives me fire, gives me life. I go to confession regularly. These are parts of the creating the sacred fire of Catholicism, and if you look back before the 60s, when Catholicism was so vibrant, you see far more sacramental participation than you do today. Also, that time very much emphasized the sacramentals, like the Rosary. But also, and I'm going to show you something here. So, you see this? What is this? This is a holy water font that I got from France. And once upon a time, all kinds of homes in France and Ireland would have had their own holy water fonts. And in this particular holy water font, I'm actually blessed to have water, blessed according to the traditional rite, which is not just like a quick blessing over the water. The priest actually exorcises the salt. There's a rite of exorcism in the blessing of the water. And not many priests will give you this kind of holy water today. I'm very grateful to the Institute of Christ the King, which supplied this holy water. So, you know, really, in preparing these videos and in other things when I'm leaving the house, I bless myself with holy water. So, really, there's so much more that I want to say about both the sacramentals and the sacraments. It seems to me that really immersing ourselves in both the sacramentals and the sacrament is the absolute key, the sine qua non for authentic counter-revolution. Now, I may well develop that at length in the next video, but I found when I did the last video that I'd made this promise to go into this, and then I regretted it because I felt boxed in. So I don't promise that the next video is going to be about that. I just indicate maybe about something else. I just indicate my intention, my hope to keep unpacking and unfolding these themes. Another theme that I very much want to keep working with, as I started last time, is the incredible possibilities that the internet now affords us for counter-revolution. So last time I mentioned the website and forum Fish Eaters as an outstanding site of counter-revolution, and I mention it again, but really there are obviously so many other things on the web. Obviously what I'm trying to do with this new YouTube channel is also another effort. And if you like the channel, I would ask you, please, like the videos and subscribe. It will help make the counter-revolution more visible. But also there are other YouTube channels. I will just quickly mention a channel called Off the Menu by my friend Charles Coulombe, speaking for Tumblr House. Charles has really exceptionally rich things to say about counter-revolution. And finally, I will just remind you that I have written 2 books about counter-revolution. I've been pointing to, or rather they're behind me. They've been behind me during the whole video, and they're published by Angelico Press. And yes, I'll also give a link to Angelico Press and to my books down below. So, I think that's all I want to say for now. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for listening while I speak about Catholic Counter Revolution. Thank you.